National Grid, pole instructor, pole number 35 on Fairview Avenue. Check this point. There's a little piece off the front, but nothing.
We can't, I don't know if there's any, we don't have a proxy to. What's that? We can start, as long as you guys are gonna, you guys are doing motions until late in this afternoon, it's proxy.
I have the floor, and before I make my opening statement, I'd like to start out today where we left off on September the 13th. If you remember then, we were having a lot of motions from, can we have quiet from the audience? Is there somebody from the, that can signal to me that the chairs are filled and that we can have some peace and quiet? I'd like to start out today where we left off on September the 13th, although this is a new meeting. But I was anticipating a lot of motions from the minority, and we did have some motions for the minority. But if you remember, I said that I'll give the minority a chance to make their motions, and then I was going to make a motion that we have a time certain to vote. And so I want to make that motion time certain to vote, but if there is a motion from a minority, I would recognize that motion first.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to subpoena Mark Judge as a witness before our committee.
Let me hold.
And I'd be happy to speak to it, but I wanted
Hold
to,
just a minute. Could you make your remarks short, please, and speak now, and then we will vote? Proceed.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We heard yesterday from an extraordinarily courageous, strong survivor, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Every one of us, I think, were riveted and powerfully impressed by her truth. We heard her provide details in that story that can be corroborated and other facts that can be uncovered if we hear from other witnesses who have very relevant, important knowledge about what happened to her on that evening in that room. The third person allegedly in the room was Mark Judge. Evidently, he has never been interviewed by the FBI. He has never been questioned by any member of our committee. He has never submitted a detailed account of what he knows. And so I move, Mr. Chairman, that we have him before this committee as a witness. He could be interviewed beforehand on a bipartisan basis. I recognize that he has submitted a cursory, conclusory 6-sentence letter, not even signed by him, it's from his attorney. And I believe we have a responsibility to subpoena, at the very least, Mark Judge before we move to vote. It is our constitutional duty to do everything we can to uncover the truth after hearing yesterday that compelling testimony from Dr. Blasey Ford. And we cannot, in good conscience, vote without hearing at least from Mark Judge. I would submit, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, that there are other witnesses essential for us to hear from. We should hear from the other sexual assault survivors who have come forward with credible and powerful stories. and that will be also, in my view, necessary, but today I am moving that we subpoena Mark Judge.
Before we vote, I will read a letter that we received from Mark Judge last night. As I stated in my attorney, Barbara Van Gelder, September 18th, 2018 letter, I did not ask to be involved in this matter, nor did anyone ask me to be involved. We've told the committee that I do want to comment. When I told the committee that I do not want to comment about these events publicly, as a recovering alcoholic and a cancer survivor, I have struggled with depression and anxiety. As a result, I avoid public speaking. Brent Kavanaugh and I were friends in high school, but we have not spoken directly in several years. I do not recall the events described by Dr. Ford in her testimony before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee today. I never saw Brett act in a manner Dr. Ford describes. I am knowingly submitting this letter under penalty of felony. Mark Judge, witnessed by Barbara Van Gelder, and he has signed it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may respond.
On the motion?
Yes, on the motion, if I may respond, that letter is no substitute for an FBI interview,
The answer is no.
Mr. Graham,
and it is no substitute for testimony before this committee.
Mr. Lee, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Sass, Mr. Flake, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Kennedy, Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mr. Durbin. Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 11 nays.
The motion is defeated. Now I move, as I said I was going to do, that we set the vote to report out Judge Kavanaugh's nomination at 1:30 p.m. today.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Wait.
That's violating the rules of the committee. Yes.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is.
Mr. Flake. Mr. Crapo.
continues.
Mr. Tillis. Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Feinstein.
No.
Mr. Leahy.
No, because it violates the customs of this committee.
Mr. Durbin.
It violates them.
No.
Mr. Durbin. Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar. No. Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Hirono.
I strongly object. This is just totally ridiculous. What a railroad job. The answer is no, no, no.
Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris.
Senator Booker.
They're not answering because this is so unfair, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 11 yeas and 8 nays.
Okay, motion carried. I'll go to my opening statement now. We have an agenda with 10 judges who are ready to be voted on. Brent Kavanaugh nominated to the Supreme Court. Jonathan Kobus nominated the 8th Circuit and 8 district court judges. We also have 2 bills on the agenda. We will hold over S 3178, the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act. We will vote on S 2785, the DTARE Act, sponsored by Senators Durbin and Graham. This bill combats offensive election interference by foreign adversaries by denying entry to any foreign national who has been deemed to engage in election interference. The amendment I'll be introducing makes clear that the Secretary of Homeland Security will make this decision on who has engaged in election interference in consultation with the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of State. Any foreign national who engages or conspires to engage in improper interference in our elections should not be allowed to enter our country under any circumstances except to stand trial. Yesterday, we heard testimony from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh regarding sexual assault allegations that date back to when the two were in high school. It was difficult and emotional for both of them. At the end of the day, the three witnesses Dr. Ford named denied any knowledge of the event she described. Judge Kavanaugh forcefully denied the allegations. The alleged behavior is inconsistent with everything else we know about him. Hundreds of people, including women he knew in high school, attested to his character and fundamental decency as a person, both in high school and now. He is widely regarded as an excellent husband, father, friend, coach, professor, judge. He has an exemplary record of being at the forefront of women's advancement in the legal profession, and he's been through 6 FBI full-time background investigations, and no issues of sexual misconduct were uncovered. It's a fundamental aspect of fairness and due process that the accuser have the burden of proving allegations. It's true yesterday's hearing was not a trial, but trials have rules based on common sense notions of fairness and due process, not the other way around. A person had allegations made against him in a public way, and his reputation and livelihood were at stake. It was only fair that his accuser had the burden of proof. In my opinion, this wasn't met. Hey, you folks that are photographers know that you're supposed to sit down. Maybe you just ought to leave the room if you don't know what the rules are. I found Dr. Ford's testimony credible and believe she's sincere in her version of the facts. But I also found Judge Kavanaugh's testimony credible and sincere. Ultimately, the existing evidence, including the statement of 3 alleged eyewitnesses named by Dr. Ford, refutes Dr. Ford's version of the facts. There is simply no reason to deny Judge Kavanaugh a seat on the Supreme Court on the basis of evidence presented to us. I reopened the hearing at the assistance of Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Dr. Ford wanted to be heard, and we gave her that opportunity. Not one question to Dr. Ford was disrespectful in any way. She was treated with courtesy and dignity as I promised her. But the questions my Democrat colleagues asked Judge Kavanaugh were unequivocally and universally hostile. My colleagues first claimed that the Senate doesn't confirm Supreme Court nominees in midterm elections. The Washington Post fact checker said that's false. Indeed, Justice can we have quiet, please? I would expect the same quiet for other people on the committee when they speak. Anyway, indeed, Justice Breyer and Kagan were both confirmed in midterm elections. Then the second attempt was to argue that we needed to request all Judge Kavanaugh's executive branch records. But they completely ignored the fact that we did not request all of Justice Kagan's executive branch records. Indeed, her most recent and relevant executive branch records from the Solicitor General's office were not requested, even despite the fact that Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most Even though Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most powerful court in the country, issuing 307 opinions and joining hundreds of others, we received over 480,000 pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time on the executive branch. This was more pages of such documents than the last 5 Supreme Court nominees combined. In short, it was the most thorough and transparent confirmation process at all. I'm going to put the rest of my statement in the record because I'm sure a lot of people are irritated right now, and I'll let them express that irritation. We'll go by seniority, so I'll call on Senator Feinstein and put the rest of my statement in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very disappointed that we're here today voting on this nomination, especially in light of the testimony that we heard just yesterday. My Republican colleagues spent their time at the hearing focused exclusively on policy and on partisanship and process. The majority argued that the sexual assault Dr. Ford experienced was nothing more than a Democratic smear campaign that I am allegedly orchestrating. My staff and I were accused of leaking Dr. Ford's letter, which we did not. We were accused of leaking Deborah Ramirez's letter, which we did not. We were said to have refused to participate in the partisan, quote, investigation, end quote. Yet it is the Republicans who have refused to talk to Debbie Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. Republicans also failed to mention Democrats were not notified and had no idea the chairman's staff had been communicating with Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, and apparently at least 2 other individuals who have not been named. Instead, Democrats learned about this outreach when various letters or emails appeared in the press. And in one case, we learned about the Republican staff outreach at 10 p.m. the night before the hearing. Ironically, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have gone so far as to say this whole situation was nothing more than a nefarious attempt at political theater. I understand why they did that. The Senate is a political body. However, I was shocked to see Judge Kavanaugh take the same tone and strategy. Candidly, in the 25 years on this committee, I have never seen a nominee for any position behave in that manner. Judge Kavanaugh used as much political rhetoric as my Republican colleagues, and what's more, he went on the attack. He yelled at Democrats for having the temerity to express our frustration for not having access to over 90% of his record, and said that some Democratic members were, quote, an embarrassment, end quote. He'd accused Democrats of, quote, lying in wait, end quote, and replacing, quote, advice and consent with search and destroy, end quote. He even went so far as to say that Dr. Ford's allegations were nothing more than, quote, a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2018 election, end quote, and, quote, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, end quote. Unbelievable. This was not someone who reflected an impartial temperament or the fairness and even-handedness one would see in a judge. This was someone who was aggressive and belligerent. I have never seen someone who wants to be elevated to the highest court in our country behave in that manner. In stark contrast, the person who testified yesterday and demonstrated a balanced temperament was Dr. Ford. She gave powerful testimony about her experience of being physically and sexually assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh. She started by saying how she was terrified to be before the committee, but she felt it was her civic duty to tell us what happened to her. She recounted her experience, and I quote, "I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life. It was hard for me to breathe, and I thought that Brett was accidentally going to kill me, end quote. Both Brett and Mark were drunkenly laughing during the attack. They seemed to be having a very good time, end quote. Another quote. Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details. I didn't want to tell my parents that I, at age 15, was in a house without any parents present, drinking beer with boys. I convinced myself that because Brett did not rape me, I should just move on and pretend that it didn't happen, end quote. She was poised, she was credible, and she should be believed. Unfortunately, despite assuring Dr. Ford her allegations would be taken seriously and she would be treated respectfully, that is not what ultimately happened. As I noted in my statement yesterday, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle had their minds made up before one word was uttered. A week ago, the majority leader declared, quote, "In the near future, Judge Kavanaugh will be on the United States Supreme Court. So, my friends, keep the faith. Don't get rattled by all this. We're going to plow right through it," end quote. This was not about ensuring a fair process. This was about doing the bare minimum. And finally, to my Republican colleagues who are so upset about the time that has passed, let's be clear. Dr. Ford asked for confidentiality, and that's what I did. We all know that if I had referred her allegations to the FBI when she would not come forward, there would have been nothing to do. The FBI would have had an anonymous allegation with no name, no contact information, and no way to follow up. In addition, Dr. Ford's allegations were referred to the FBI on September 12th, over 2 weeks ago. If the president and the Republican majority had asked for the FBI to do an investigation at that time, like we asked, it would likely be finished by now. And most importantly, when Judge Kavanaugh has talked to Republicans repeatedly, none of us have spoken to or questioned Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, or the polygraph examiner. None of us have talked to or questioned James Roach, Lynn Brooks, Liz Swisher, Tom Kaine, or Chris Dudley. Not one senator, as far as I know, has had the opportunity to or question Deborah Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. My colleagues are right that we should not rush to judgment, and it's not fair to assume Judge Kavanaugh is guilty without gathering the information. But it's equally unfair to have heard from a credible, poised, and brave witness and simply ignore what we heard and move forward immediately. I don't know Deborah Ramirez. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. I don't know Judy Swetnick. I don't know whether her allegations are credible. But I do know this. Dr. Ford provided credible, powerful testimony that deserves to be considered and not dismissed as a partisan smear campaign, which it was not. In my opening statement yesterday, I talked about the differences between Me Too and the Year of the Woman, and I highlighted the seriousness of sexual assault and harassment. I started out by saying I hoped we would do better and show women that our country, our committee, has in fact changed. This isn't a political battle for power, as some have said. This is a serious undertaking with serious allegations. While the Republican strategy is no longer attack the victim, it is ignore the victim. The entire country is watching now how we handle these serious allegations. It is, in fact, a real test for the United States Senate and for our country to see how we treat women, especially women who are survivors of sexual assault. I believe we can do better, and I hope we are better. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record a longer statement that addresses some of the attacks regarding my office's handling of Dr. Ford's allegations and the Republican administration.
Obviously, without objection, those will be included. Before I call on Senator Hatch, since this keeps coming up about the FBI investigation, I'd like to repeat what you've heard from me so many times, but I guess we never get this, get people understanding. We can't learn anything from the FBI that we can't learn ourselves. The Senate has our own constitutional duty and our own investigators to follow up on these allegations. I don't think we should discredit the Senate's constitutional duty of oversight as a co-equal independent branch of government. If the people on the other side of the aisle sincerely want an FBI investigation, I would ask why they did not notify me of Dr. Ford's then confidential letter way back in July so the FBI could weigh in. The FBI would honor confidentiality, and so would I. And I've had 38 years reputation of protecting constitutionality or confidentiality of whistleblowers. Another span of time for an FBI investigation as my Democrat colleagues have called for, or even more recently people outside calling for, would result in another time of brutal attacks on Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh and their families. They don't deserve those sorts of vile threats that they're receiving, and it's unacceptable. Dr. Ford has stated no objections to an FBI investigation, so why has the need for an FBI investigation only come to our attention here in the last several days, probably less than 2 weeks? It's been 60 days since Dr. Ford's letter was made public. Then we've had some comment about why we didn't investigate Ramirez. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them, unlike our Democratic colleagues, some of whom sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the commission.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me for interrupting, because we have order.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, I would agree on the order. The order would be that we go back and forth, and apparently you could have 2 Republicans meeting and 1 Democrat. Is that what the chairman's doing?
That's what, absolutely. After I get done, and I'm not giving an opening statement, I'm explaining, as a chairman ought to explain, the work of the committee to people that don't seem to understand it. I'll call on Senator Hatch when I'm done, and then I'm going to call on you, Senator Leahy. When I learned of Ms. Ramirez's allegations, I acted immediately to investigate them, unlike our Democrat colleagues, some of who sat on her story and apparently conducted their own private investigation rather than share it with the chairman. I first learned of her allegations when they became public in the article New Yorker, published late Sunday evening, September 23rd. My staff immediately contacted her counsel asking when she was available for an interview with committee investigators. The next afternoon, Monday, September 24, her counsel responded that Ms. Ramirez, quote, has accurately relayed what she recalls to the New Yorker. Her counsel, end of quote. Her counsel added, however, that, quote, she would welcome an investigation by the FBI into this investigation and would cooperate with such. On appropriate terms, she would also agree to be interviewed in person, end of quote. Over the 24th and the 25th of this month, my staff repeatedly asked Ms. Ramirez's counsel 2 questions before setting up a call to discuss her allegations so that such a call could actually be meaningful and useful. number one, whether she had, quote, any other evidence, including other statements, in addition to those that are contained in the New Yorker article, end of quote. And two, whether she was, quote, willing to provide her evidence, including her testimony, to committee investigators, end of quote. My staff repeatedly made clear that it welcomed, quote, the receipt of Ms. Ramirez or anyone else's evidence in the form of a letter or email to the chairman and ranking member, a letter or email from counsel to the chairman or ranking member, or a statement to committee investigators. Ms. Ramirez, counsel, has still not provided any evidence to committee staff. If evidence emerged, we of course would proceed as appropriate. My staff also acted swiftly to set up an interview with Judge Kavanaugh. He unequivocally denied Ms. Ramirez's allegations. I regret that my Democrat colleagues again failed to timely bring this relevant information to his attention. The article makes clear that some Democratic senators have known of Ms. Ramirez's allegations for some time, and it quotes one Democrat member of the committee as saying this allegation, quote, should be fully investigated, end of quote. That is exactly what I have done and what could have been done easier if Senate Democrats had not kept the information to themselves. And then my last one will deal with the Sedgwick allegations. 2 days ago, we became aware of the allegations of Julie Swetnick. She claimed that Judge Kavanaugh was involved in a gang rape ring around Washington, D.C. area in the 1980s. My staff has been trying to obtain evidence of her claims and interview her since Sunday, 3 days before she made her allegation public. But her attorney has so far not cooperated in the investigation. By the accuser's own description, she regularly attended parties where she knew girls were being gang raped. Instead of telling authorities about this serious criminal activity, she continued to attend them. And somehow the FBI missed Judge Kavanaugh's 6 full field background investigations while he worked in a high-profile position in the White House and the judiciary. The fact that he was a regular participation in these gang rape parties. Now that ought to get a lot of people's attention. We had 6 full field background investigations by the FBI, and what he was accused of by Ms. Sedgwick never showed up. And that ought to be, if it was that much of an activity on his part, surely the FBI would know about it. Senator Hatch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very difficult set of hearings and a difficult markup, and I think you've handled it very well. And I compliment all of our people on both sides of the aisle for approaching this very seriously. And it should be approached seriously. It's been 81 days since President Trump nominated Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. Since then, we've reviewed more records of this nominee than for any Supreme Court nominee in history, ever. Judge Kavanaugh has testified for well over 30 hours, including in a closed session. He has answered nearly 1,300 written questions, more than all other past Supreme Court nominees combined. In the more than 12 years that Judge Kavanaugh has been a judge on the D.C. Circuit, he has built a reputation for honesty, courtesy, and integrity. His clerks and colleagues, they sing his praises. He volunteers in the community. He's been an advocate for and mentor to his students. After Democrats unleashed the recent allegations against Judge Kavanaugh, Chairman Grassley set out a deliberative process to investigate. He has not been, as some claim, a bully. Far from it. But rather than working with us, my Democratic colleagues chose not to participate in this process. Indeed, before yesterday, they had never even asked Judge Kavanaugh a single question about these allegations. And yet again and again, their refrain has been the same. delay, delay, delay. I can't blame them for that because they are partisan people, and yeah, and they, I guess they figured that would be to their advantage. Well, it's not. When we heard the serious allegations made by Dr. Ford, we recognized that we needed to hear her testimony. Chairman Grassley was committed to making sure that she had a safe forum in which to tell her story. He tried to make it a forum of her choosing, either public or private. Although it appears the lawyers my Democratic colleagues suggested to her had other plans. Yesterday, we finally were able to hear from Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. I want to personally thank them, but I want to thank them both for attending the hearing and speaking to the committee and to all of us and to the American public as well. After the hearing, I saw that Mr. Avenatti decided that the best place for his client to give her first interview was on a show called The Circus. The title is fitting, because that is what this process has become. All of my Democratic colleagues have said for weeks that they will vote against Judge Kavanaugh. Here's where I stand. We can't allow more time for new smears to, we can't allow more time for new smears to damage Judge Kavanaugh, his family, his reputation, the reputation of the court, and of course the reputation of the country. We cannot allow more time for partisans on the left to try to beat Judge Kavanaugh into submission. We can prolong this process knowing that in the meantime, and we shouldn't prolong it is what I'm saying, without knowing that in the meantime, Judge Kavanaugh's family and our country will be dragged through the mud. Or we can end this circus, and frankly, we've reached a point where it's time to end the circus. It's time to show some dignity around here. It's time to vote. People can make their closing statements. They can vote whatever way they want to. Nobody's telling them what to do. And frankly, we've had enough time on this to choke a horse. And I just have to say, let's be fair about this. Let's vote whichever way we want to, and let's move on this. I personally am tired of all the games and all the gamesmanship that's been going on around not just this nominee, but others as well. And Mr. Chairman, as a former chairman of this committee and a chairman of 2 other committees in my time in the Senate, I want you to know that I think you've done a terrific job. You've been fair. You've been very decent in your approach. You have treated everybody with respect. You've especially treated our Democratic colleagues with respect, which they deserve. And frankly, you're a great chairman. And I think we ought to all acknowledge that and start treating our chairman with a little more respect and dignity. We all respect him. We all know what a good man he is. I also think the ranking member has been good through this process as well. I like her very much. She's very sincere. She's on the other side of this from me, but she believes in what she's doing, and I have to stand up and say she has a right to do that. And I just want her to know that I appreciate her and her leadership on this committee. But it's time to vote. It's time to quit making the political, well, you can make your political statements, but they ought to be made in lieu of the vote, and then we ought to vote this and make a final determination on where this nominee is going to go. For one,
Senator Lee.
I'm just not finished. For one, I know Judge Kavanaugh. I've known him for a long time. He has an impeccable reputation. He's well respected as a judge in this country by Democrats and Republicans who know him well.
Truly
And it would be an absolute crying shame if we keep treating him like he's some sort of an imposter or some sort of a person that just can't do this job. He can do the job. He has done the job, and he's doing it on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the second highest court in the country. And I have a lot of confidence in him. Those who don't, they can vote no.
Senator Lee.
You know, in some ways, it feels like Alice in Wonderland around here. It's unbelievable where we are today. It's almost surreal. This Judiciary Committee is no longer an independent branch of government, and we're supposed to be. The Senate's supposed to be. an independent, equal branch of government. We're no longer that. But we're an arm and a very weak arm of the Trump White House. Every semblance of independence has just disappeared. It's gone. And I think that is something historians will look at. And they'll call it a turning point in the United States Senate. This committee, after months of breaking precedent after precedent in a manic rush to fill a Supreme Court seat, is now on the verge of voting on a nominee who has been credibly accused of sexual assault, and the committee hasn't even conducted a meaningful investigation. Yesterday, we heard the powerful and courageous testimony of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Following her testimony, I doubt that not one of us left the committee room doubting her credibility. I'm sure nobody doubted her credibility. But then Judge Kavanaugh angrily denied the allegation, and I'll get to that shortly. But we should all agree that a credible allegation of sexual assault against a nominee to our nation's highest court demands that we proceed with the utmost caution. Our constitutional obligation, at the very least, is to investigate these allegations properly. This isn't about delaying a nomination until after the election, even though we have that precedent when the Republicans did that with Merrick Garland. This is about doing our job. This is what we're elected to do, what we're paid to do. And the first step is an FBI investigation. That has always been the first step when new derogatory information comes to light about a nominee. Even in one instance when the information was as minor as decades-old marijuana use, Republicans still made sure we had an FBI investigation. Why is Judge Kavanaugh, who is facing much more serious allegations of sexual abuse, why is he being held to a lower standard than all the nominees before him? Certainly all the nominees I've seen in 44 years. A proper investigation also means hearing from all the witnesses. That includes the 4 witnesses who signed sworn affidavits offered by Dr. Ford. And most stunningly, this committee has refused to call the sole eyewitness to the alleged assault, Mark Judge. Instead, all we have is a brief letter from Mr. Judge vaguely asserting that he has no memory of this alleged incident. Well, I'd like to ask him questions about that under oath, and a lot of us would. He has effectively nailed a do not disturb sign, and apparently the Republicans on this committee are satisfied, as if oral testimony and opportunity to question a witness is unnecessary. Now, whether you believe Judge Kavanaugh or you believe Dr. Ford, the fact that we're not allowed to hear from somebody who's said to be the sole eyewitness is outrageous. Everybody here knows that. I said yesterday that an earlier time the Senate failed Anita Hill, whom I believed. Today we're doing even worse. At the time of Anita Hill, we had an FBI investigation. We had almost 24 witnesses. Here, Republicans are not willing to do either, even if it would delay this information, or this nomination, just a matter of a week or two, certainly far short of the November election. They don't want to hear women who have relevant evidence. Is that really what the Senate Judiciary Committee has lowered itself to? I'm at a loss how Republicans could think they've heard enough about Dr. Ford's allegations and are ready to move on.
previous question is not.
I think you should look at what the reactions are you're getting around this country. Dr. Ford captivated the nation yesterday with her horrifying story of sexual assault. Every minute of her testimony was credible. She knew Brett Kavanaugh. She knew Mark Judge. This was not a case of mistaken identity. And in a moment that I'll never forget, when I asked her for her strongest memory, something from the incident she couldn't escape, she testified, indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two as a teenage Judge Kavanaugh drunkenly pinned Dr. Ford down to the bed and attempted to sexually assault her. Indelible is the memory of the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two. As a member of this committee, as a former prosecutor, as a husband and a parent, I found Dr. Ford's testimony to be wholly credible. Not one member of this committee has suggested she was not, and the same cannot be said of Judge Kavanaugh. Judge Kavanaugh's veracity has been an issue every single time he's ever testified before the Senate. Whether it's repeatedly telling senators they had no role in vetting or working on various controversial Bush-era judicial nominees, something that turned out to be a blatant untruth, or whether it's testifying in response to more than 100 different questions from both Republican, half a dozen Republican and Democratic senators that he never received or believed he received obviously stolen materials from Democratic senators' computers. That was another blatant untruth. We found we could not depend on Judge Kavanaugh to tell the truth under oath. We only learned the truth years later. We only learned the truth of what he had said, untruthfully. After we reviewed the small portion of his White House record that Chairman Grassley was willing to request for this nomination. Time and time again, when confronted under oath with questions about his involvement in Bush-era scandals or controversial matters, Judge Kavanaugh misled the Senate. Now, the fact that he's misled the Senate over and over and over again, that does not make him guilty of sexual assault as a 17-year-old. Nor does the fact that he minimized the heavy drinking in his youth and misrepresented the misogyny in his yearbook. But it does go to the heart of Judge Kavanaugh's truthfulness anytime he's faced with potentially incriminating questions. Yesterday, Judge Kavanaugh falsely claimed over and over again that every other person Dr. Ford placed in the house said the assault didn't happen. That's just not true. And we know it's not. The only person who's claimed this incident didn't happen is Brett Kavanaugh. The others said they had no knowledge or memory of it, just as Dr. Ford assumed they would say, given that it was for them an ordinary night. And one of them even states she believed Dr. Ford, which of course Judge Kavanaugh conveniently failed to acknowledge. Judge Kavanaugh's defiance and evasiveness, his vehement partisan attacks against members of this committee, in the face of powerful, incriminating testimony, surpassed even that of Clarence Thomas at the time of Anita Hill. He tried to portray Dr. Ford's allegation as part of a calculated an orchestrated political hit. In my years as a prosecutor, I saw a lot of times when people try to blame the victim, not to own up to their own deeds. He angrily asserted baseless political tirades. He was all too eager to promote the false Republican talking point that Senator Feinstein was lying in wait with this allegation. He even claimed the allegations were driven by revenge on behalf of the Clintons. It's hard to make this stuff up. That amounts to conspiratorial madness. In my time in the Senate, I have never seen such volatility, partisanship, and a lack of judicial temperament from any nominee for any court in any administration. It's no secret that I have deep concerns about what a Justice Kavanaugh would mean for the rights of women, for workers, for health care, for unchecked presidential power, and other important issues. I also believe he's unfit to serve on our nation's highest court because of his history of misleading the Senate while under oath. But as serious as these concerns are, this is different. Voting to advance and ultimately confirm Judge Kavanaugh while he's under this dark cloud of suspicion will forever change the Senate and our nation's highest court. It will politicize the U.S. Supreme Court, a branch of our government that should be above politics. And for victims and survivors of sexual violence struggling with whether to come forward, the consequences may be even worse. Every one of us who's been a prosecutor has seen how hard it is sometimes for victims to come forward. And are we sending the signal that you stay there, don't come forward? You know, how this committee handles this nomination will be viewed as a reflection of how seriously our society views credible claims of sexual misconduct. During Dr. Ford's testimony, the National Sexual Assault Hotline saw an unprecedented 147% increase in calls. When survivors see us taking sexual assault seriously, they're empowered to come forward. If they see us callously sweeping it under the rug, I fear they'll have disastrous consequences. If victims think they'll never be believed, or will not matter even if they are believed, then why come forward at all? Dr. Ford deserves to be heard. And that must mean more than just checking a box. Remember, Dr. Ford did not spend her entire life preparing for this moment. She is not backed by the most powerful officials in our nation's government. She did not come here with a political agenda. She did not testify with a job promotion on the line. She did not evade our questions, and she did not demean our motives of either Republicans or Democrats. She instead plainly, with grace, and at times emotionally, recounted the trauma that she experienced as a 15-year-old girl. Trauma has been haunting her for the 36 years since. She had nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward. I listened closely to both her and Judge Kavanaugh, and I believe her as I believed Anita Hill. I'll be voting no on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination. He does not have the veracity nor the temperament for a lifetime appointment to the highest court in our nation. And no such nominee should be confirmed in the face of such serious, credible, and unresolved allegations of sexual assault.
Senator Graham.
Thank you. I know I'm a single white male from South Carolina, and I've told I should shut up, but I will not shut up if that's okay, because I got here the same way everybody else did. The people in South Carolina voted for me and Senator Scott to be their voice, men and women. And I'm going to try to be their voice today. And maybe not just for South Carolina, but a little bit about what I think is going on here. Joe Biden, I can't believe we're saying this on our side. Listen to Joe. But Joe was right a lot. Joe Biden's a unique guy. If you had one last conversation before you die, you'd want to have it with Joe. You'd be around for a while. He's a decent guy. If he runs for president, he'd be hard to beat. He came to Senator Thurman's funeral and gave a long eulogy. And I asked him, Joe, I said, that was incredible. This can't help you in Delaware. I said, I just like the old guy. I didn't agree with him, and I didn't like some of the things he did in his life, but when I was down and out, he was there for me. And to my colleagues on the other side, this will end, and we'll see what we do next. I hope we can muster the ability to move forward, but some observations about where we find ourselves and how we got here. I wrote a book, and I think Senator Blumenthal is the only person I know that actually read it. It was online. I ran for president, and I got 1%, so I had my time to be president. Didn't go very far, and I lost. I didn't think Trump would win. I ran out of adjectives to describe about how I felt about his campaign. Well, he won and I lost, and he's president. And I'll try to help him where I can, and say no when I must, and the election's over for me. I would like to tell him that you had a choice to make for the Supreme Court vacancy of Justice Kennedy. I think you did a good job, Mr. President. For somebody who's supposedly crazy and there's chaos everywhere, he did a good job here. Now, why difference between Gorsuch and Kennedy? Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. It's the Kennedy seat. If you don't get that, you're not paying much attention. Gorsuch is a even swap for Scalia. But this is high-stakes stuff, right? This is the seat where the guy in the middle is at risk. Kavanaugh clerked for Justice Kennedy. Would you have picked him? No. But you lost the election. And that does have consequences. When I said it about Obama winning, I meant it. Merrick Garland. Scalia dies in the election year, the last year of the term of President Obama. The primaries are already underway. Not in 100 years has anybody been nominated under that circumstance, so I don't think I did anything unfair with Garland. As to Sotomayor and Kagan, I was told on our side, you've got to keep them off the court because they're going to be a pro-choice vote. They hate guns. On and on and on. And I tried to go back to what this committee used to do. Strom Thurmond voted for Ginsburg. You'll never convince me that it was because he agreed with her philosophy. I think he saw in her a qualified person. Fritz Hollings voted for Scalia. The same is true. 96 and 97 votes. What's happened? Most of the nominees to the Supreme Court have never had a hearing. It was always just assumed if they're qualified and they're not hacks, that they're going to go forward. Elections do matter. When it comes to President Trump, elections do matter. Now, about the law, and to my friends who have been prosecutors. I've been a prosecutor, I've been a defense attorney, and I've been a judge. Every woman who's been victimized needs to be heard. Count me in 1,000 times over. Count me in for the proposition for every one woman who comes forward, only God knows how many women and children go to their grave with the abuse. If you don't realize that, you just don't know this area of life. But you're going to be heard in the United States. I had a young man accused of sexual assault when I was in the Air Force as a defense attorney. The case eventually fell apart, and he almost killed himself. I had women who've been gang raped and didn't want to testify, but they did. Along with counselors, I sat up with them all night. Tough stuff. Emotional. Who to believe? I've been doing this legal stuff most of my life. I've never heard a more compelling defense of one's honor and integrity than I did from Brett Kavanaugh. He looked me in the eye, everybody in the eye, and he was mad, and he should have been mad. He could tell you where he was at and what he was doing during high school in a way that just blew me away. Brett Kavanaugh and women. If you're a gang rapist when you're a sophomore and a junior in high school, you don't let it go. Every woman who actually knows Brett Kavanaugh has come forward to say he is not that kind of guy. He has been at the highest level of public service, under tremendous scrutiny, 6 FBI investigations, and we missed the sophomore, junior gang rapist. We didn't miss it. It's much garbage. We're in the twilight zone, and here's what I would say. Miss Ford. All I can say about Miss Ford, I feel sorry for her, and I do believe something happened to her, and I don't know when and where, but I don't believe it was Brett Kavanaugh. And as a prosecutor, you couldn't get out of the batter's box, because in America, before you can accuse somebody of a crime, you have to tell them when it happened and where it happened, and you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt it did happen. The reason this case will never be brought in Maryland or anywhere else, you just can't get there. If you wanted to get a warrant, which is a probable cause standard, to search or arrest somebody, you got to prove by probable cause where it happened and when it happened. How are you supposed to defend yourself? Is the burden really on you to prove that you were not at a party 35 years ago and they won't tell you where it was and when it was? So all I can say is that under any reasonable standard, any concept of the rule of law, this would not go forward. There have been 5 allegations here. The 5th allegation was brought to me by Senator Whitehouse, who did absolutely the right thing. Somebody contacted him in Rhode Island and said a friend of his was on a boat with Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh, and they treated her badly. He went down and beat him up, and she won't come forward. I said, well, I'll make sure I'll join with you. Let the FBI look at it. And turned out not to be true. The 4th allegation was an anonymous allegation, a letter without a date or a return address sent to Corey Gardner just a few days ago. And he turned it over to the committee, and somebody on that side leaked it to NBC News, and it made it on the news, the 4th allegation. That really bothers me. I don't know what's going on over there, but that's not right. It was somebody over there. Now, about Miss Ford. I feel really bad that she wanted to remain anonymous and could not. The one thing I know for sure is that Dianne Feinstein would not do this and did not do this. But I know for sure somebody did. It wasn't chatter from a friend. 3 groups had this letter that was requested to be anonymous. Dianne Feinstein and her staff, the Congresswoman from California and her staff, and the lawyers. Somebody betrayed her trust, and if you can't figure out why, you shouldn't be driving. To delay this hearing, to set in motion the destruction of this man, to keep this seat open past the election. That I know beyond any doubt. What else do I know? I about fell out of my chair when Dr. Ford said yesterday, I didn't know you would be willing to come to me. The email interactions between this committee and her lawyers, my staff would still welcome the opportunity to speak with Dr. Ford at any time and any place convenient to her. Come to us or we to you. I'm willing to have my staff travel to Dr. Ford in California or anywhere else to obtain her testimony September the 19th. Well, that wouldn't fit in the plan. It wouldn't be public, and it would get over with sooner than people wanted. I don't know what to believe, but I tend to believe that Dr. Ford did not know about this invitation. And I've been a lawyer most of my adult life, and somebody needs to ask the question to her lawyers, how could she not know about this? Are you beginning to understand what's been going on for a very long time in this case? It's not that hard to figure out. So if this is the new standard, the accusation proves itself to those who want to ask questions. You hate women. God help us all. If the new standard for the committee is that there is no presumption of anything, that you have to prove why somebody would accuse you. Not just say, I didn't do it, and here's why I didn't do it, but you got to prove the motives of your accuser. God help us all. The Avenatti moment tells you what's going to happen if we keep this farce going. Plenty of time, plenty of opportunities to get to the truth. This has never been about the truth. This has been about delay and destruction. And if we reward this, it is the end of good people wanting to be judges. It is the end of any concept of the rule of law. It's the beginning of a process that will tear this country apart. And if I am chairman next year, if we keep the majority and Senator Grassley moves over, and I hope he doesn't because I think he's done a great job, I'm going to remember this. There's the process before Kavanaugh and the process after Kavanaugh. If you want to vet the nominee, you can. If you want to delay things for the next election, you will not. If you try to destroy somebody, you will not get away with it. Jeff is leaving. He has wrestled with this. He is trying to be fair. I cannot tell you, Jeff, what happened 35 years ago. I can tell you this, that through any legal system, this thing would not get out of the batter's box, and that everything I know about Judge Kavanaugh screams that this didn't happen, and all the other things. So, to my good friends on the other side who are struggling, I think an FBI investigation is going to do nothing. It's not going to tell you any more than we know now. It's going to just keep it going and going and going till he breaks and he won't, until the next 5 come forward. I'm going to vote yes. And I'm going to tell his 2 daughters that I'm proud of your dad, and I really, really believe he's a good man. And I'm going to tell Dr. Ford, I am sorry you had to go through this too.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thursday was an historic day in the Senate committee with more than its fair share of history. In our deliberations over the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court, we have confronted some of the most serious charges ever leveled against a nominee. Those charges were made at a moment in our nation's history when we are living through a cultural revolution. Women in America are not only emerging into more and more positions of responsibility, they are now airing grievances over sexual harassment and abuse at every level of society. Caught in the vortex of this cultural shift, there is not a person in this room who can truly measure the trajectory or ultimate outcome of this historic change. America is marching forward in the pursuit of justice for women in this country. Sadly, many on the Senate Judiciary Committee are still mired in the dead space it was 27 years ago during the Clarence Thomas nomination hearing. Yesterday in this room, America saw this inflammatory issue in real time, in real life. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was credible, cooperative, and resolute. When I asked her directly, under oath, the degree of certainty that she had that she was assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh, she responded 100%. When the prosecutor on the Republican side tried to weave a political conspiracy or make her a tool of her lawyers, it fell flat. This woman, who had identified Brett Kavanaugh as her assailant to her husband and therapist 6 years ago, believed she had a responsibility as a citizen to come forward and tell her story. I thought about the words she used during the course of her testimony yesterday. The word she used more often than not to describe her motives was helpful. Helpful. She wanted to be helpful to this committee and to her nation. I believe her. But she was afraid in awakening those carefully guarded and painful memories, and she was afraid for her family. She confided in our colleague Dianne Feinstein with the clear understanding that Dianne would protect her identity, and I have no doubt that Dianne accepted that responsibility and kept her word. Yesterday, 2 members of this committee leveled personal attacks at Senator Feinstein. They said she concealed Dr. Ford's letter for partisan reasons, and one went so far as to say that she leaked the contents of that letter, or her staff leaked that letter, to the press. Perhaps in this Trumpian era, those sorts of baseless personal charges are to be expected. But if we descend to this level of political discourse, we will have forsaken the traditions of the Senate and the comedy, which is essential to our public service. And for the record, this baseless claim was refuted immediately by The Intercept, which was first to publish the story about Dr. Ford's allegation. Their reporter said last night, and I quote, "Feinstein's staff did not leak the letter to The Intercept." Yesterday, Dr. Ford made the personal decision to tell her story publicly. She came before this committee under oath and volunteered to answer every question. None of the Republicans on this committee were willing to question or confront her, not one. They sat silent as their prosecutor, Miss Mitchell, tried to do their work. But after Dr. Ford completed her testimony and left the building, it was a different story. Last night on a TV show, one senator said, and I quote, "Miss Ford has got a problem, and destroying Judge Kavanaugh's life won't fix her problem." How could you listen to her honest and direct testimony and draw that conclusion? Judge Kavanaugh's opening statement yesterday was filled with raw emotion. Looking at his family and friends gathered to support him, one could not help but feel, as our colleague Senator Flake reminded us, that this undertaking is deeply personal and there's humanity to reconcile on both sides of the ledger. I could feel the intensity of what he has experienced over the last few weeks, but I could not understand how Judge Kavanaugh could say that he, quote, bore no ill will towards Dr. Ford, then called her charges, quote, a calculated, orchestrated political hit, citing, quote, apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and his 2016 election, and, quote, revenge on behalf of the Clintons. Revenge on behalf of the Clintons. This locker-up grace note in Judge Kavanaugh's remarks may have raised a cheer in the White House, but at a sad moment in the history of this committee. The exchange I had with Judge Kavanaugh was an honest effort to loose the Gordian knot this committee faces when two sworn witnesses are in direct contradiction. What I asked for, what many have asked for, is obvious. Turn over the facts we know to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Let them connect the dots. Let them complete the investigation. Then let us meet and evaluate their findings. Do you remember yesterday when on several occasions the Republicans made a point of quoting the American Bar Association? Mr. Chairman, I would like permission to enter into the record a letter sent to this committee on September 27, 2018 by the American Bar Association.
Without objection, it'll be entered.
Let me read it. This is what the committee received. The American Bar Association urges the Senate Judiciary Committee, and as appropriate the full Senate, to conduct a confirmation vote on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States only after an appropriate background check into the allegations made by Professor Ford and others is completed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We make this request because of the ABA's respect for the rule of law and due process under law. The basic principles that underscore the Senate's constitutional duty of advice and consent on federal judicial nominees require nothing less than a careful examination of the accusations and facts by the FBI. Each appointment to our nation's highest court, as with all others, is simply too important to rush to a vote. Deciding to proceed without conducting additional investigation would not only have a lasting impact on the Senate's reputation, but it will also negatively affect the great trust necessary for the American people to have in the Supreme Court. It must remain an institution that will reliably follow the law and not politics. Respectfully, the Senate should recognize that a thorough FBI investigation will demonstrate its commitment to a Supreme Court that is above reproach. That letter was signed by Robert Carlson, President of the American Bar Association. All the quotes yesterday about the ABA's finding on Judge Kavanaugh are a distant second to what we've been asked by the same organization to do, and it is not an unreasonable request. So who is telling the truth? Two sworn witnesses in direct contradiction. But there is one significant difference. One of these sworn witnesses has stepped forward and said, I will submit my testimony and myself to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, understanding that anyone who lies to the Federal Bureau of Investigation is subject to criminal prosecution. The other witness evaded that question over and over and over. Oh, I'll leave it up to the committee. It's up to the chairman. You're going to have to decide on that. You make that decision. Judge Kavanaugh knows better. He knows that if he had turned yesterday to the White House counsel and says, suspend this until we have an FBI investigation to clear my name, my reputation, and my nomination to this court, it was the right thing to do. Because those scales had been tipped in favor of the one sworn witness who is willing to take her case before the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I will be voting no on the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
Before I call on Senator Cornyn, since the ABA letter came up, I have this comment that the president of the ABA called for an FBI investigation, as you just heard, and to do it before a vote. I've explained many times another FBI investigation is not necessary. The ABA is an outside organization like any other that can send us letters and share their advice, but we're not going to let them dictate our committee's business. Also, this letter is from the president of the ABA, one individual. He doesn't represent the hundreds of thousands of lawyers in the United States. It isn't at all clear that the ABA president has authority to speak for the organization on this matter. This letter doesn't say that he conferred with anyone else or that he convened the Judicial Qualification Committee by conference call or otherwise. The ABA president's opinion doesn't alter the fact that Judge Kavanaugh received a very well qualified rating from the ABA Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary, and the Standing Committee did not join this letter. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I've said before that I believe that in considering Dr. Ford's testimony, we should treat her the same way I would want my wife, my daughters, or my mother treated if they were in similar circumstances. Conversely, I want to make sure we treat Judge Kavanaugh the same way we would treat my father, my brother, or a son. We owe that to both Judge Kavanaugh and to Dr. Ford. It is simply false to say that somehow we have, in drawing attention to the fact that this has been an orchestrated effort to delay the vote on this nomination, that we have somehow been disrespectful of Dr. Ford. I'm proud of the way this committee treated Dr. Ford yesterday. I thought it was appropriate, dignified, and apparently our friends across the aisle are somehow upset that we got a trained lawyer who handles claims like this on a daily basis to handle it in a thoughtful, appropriate way to elicit facts and information from Dr. Ford. I thought Ms. Mitchell did a good job. But to somehow wrap themselves in the normal compassion we would that we do feel for somebody in Dr. Ford's situation and claim that we are not treating her well by pointing out the overt politicalization of this process is simply trying to take our eye off the ball. There has been a calculated effort to manipulate this process in a way that is blatantly unfair to Dr. Ford and to Judge Kavanaugh, and that's shameful. I said yesterday, I think this is one of the darkest days for the United States Senate since the McCarthy hearings that occurred back in the 50s. You may recall the comments of one of the lawyers who said, I never really gauged your cruelty or recklessness before today, and asked Senator McCarthy, have you no sense of decency? I think this process has been cruel and reckless and indecent for both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. And it did not have to be that way. When we learned yesterday from Dr. Ford that she did not authorize the release of the letter of July 30 that she sent to Senator Feinstein, she did not authorize it. She did not want it leaked, but it was leaked. And she said the only people that had possession of it were her lawyers, Senator Feinstein, and Representative Eshoo. You can reach your own conclusion, but the letter had to come from somewhere. And when she testified that she was not informed of Chairman Grassley's offer to travel where she was to interview her with bipartisan participation about her claims, she said it wasn't clear to her that offer had ever been made. So when the letter was leaked by somebody, when the offer to interview her before a bipartisan panel of investigators at a place and time of her choosing out of the public eye, when that was not communicated, it sure looks to me, at least the circumstantial evidence would seem to point to the desire to have exactly what we had yesterday and to contribute to what has been described as accurately as a circus atmosphere. Cruel, reckless, no sense of decency. I would point to the fact that Judge Kavanaugh said as long as this nomination has been pending, you've seen a trend toward more and more scurrilous, salacious, and uncorroborated allegations being made against him, all of which the chairman and the committee professional staff have attempted to investigate. We heard from Dr. Ford. We also saw a claim by Ms. Ramirez that was uncorroborated by the dozens of witnesses that allegedly existed, that the New York Times could not confirm. Nobody would confirm her allegation. And then yesterday, the ranking member quoted from some of the claims of Ms. Swetnick, represented by Mr. Avenatti. And I was struck by the fact that some of the allegations made in the statement by Ms. Swetnick that we got on September the 25th, 2018, accused Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh to gang rape high school girls at a time when Ms. Swetnick was in college, and says she went back to parties in high school where girls were gang raped, not on one occasion, not on two occasions. She said she went to 10 such parties. I'm shocked that our colleagues would embrace this kind of uncorroborated, outrageous, salacious allegation, considering the facts and the timing and the representation by Stormy Daniels' lawyer, obviously eager for more public attention and notoriety. But you didn't hear that in the quote from the ranking member yesterday when she quoted from some of the allegations made by Ms. Swetnick. Our friend, the ranking member, said yesterday that the integrity of the Senate is on trial. I agree with that. And we're failing badly. Cruelty, recklessness, indecency toward the people we should be treating with respect and dignity. That extends to Mark Judge. Isn't it obvious what is happening here with Mark Judge? He has submitted a statement under penalty of felony saying that Brett Kavanaugh and I were friends in high school, but we've not spoken for several years. I do not recall the events described by Dr. Ford in her testimony before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee today. He submitted that statement yesterday. He said, I never saw Brett act in the manner Dr. Ford describes. I am knowingly submitting this letter under penalty of felony. So he says he has nothing more to offer. He submitted his statement under penalty of felony, but here's the other part. He admits to be a recovering alcoholic, as well as a cancer survivor. He said he struggles with depression and anxiety, so much that he avoids public speaking. And our colleagues across the aisle believe that the appropriate course of conduct is to drag Mr. Judge into this circus-like atmosphere, to subject his battle with alcoholism and addiction to public investigation and scrutiny and ridicule. That is cruel. That is reckless. That is indecent. So, Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I believe this is a calculated effort to delay the vote. I think the evidence all points to that. And the longer we go without voting, it's clear to me that people like Mr. Avenatti and others eager to get attention and willing to peddle the most salacious, uncorroborated, outrageous allegations against this nominee, that we'll continue to see more of the same. It's well known that about 150 nominations are pending on the Senate calendar. If there's been one thing that's been the hallmark of our colleagues' conduct across the aisle during the time of the Trump administration, it's to obstruct, delay, and deny this administration the benefit of the nominees which they have sent to the Senate for advice and consent. That includes not only judges, but all aspects of the federal government. 150 nominations pending on the Senate calendar because even in controversial nominees, they want to obstruct, delay, and deny this administration the benefit of the people they've chosen to help govern. So it strikes me as entirely consistent with what we have seen on this nomination. And I think it's disgraceful, as Senator Hatch said yesterday. I think the way Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh have been treated is a scandal, and it is cruel, reckless, and indecent.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be fairly brief because I announced my intention to vote against Kavanaugh already. Judge Kavanaugh has an unpleasant record, both of associations with and rulings for a powerful array of activist Republican special interests, to whom he gives a 90% win rate. The Supreme Court has an equally unpleasant record of 5-4 partisan rulings for those same big interests. Not 3 or 4 times, not even 1 or 2 dozen times, but under Chief Justice Roberts, 70 times, all 5-4 partisan decisions. The court is flying all the warning flags of a captured agency, dancing to special interest tunes and rampaging through precedent and principle to get there. This will be a disaster for the court, and I believe Kavanaugh will contribute to that disaster. His partisan screed yesterday was telling. As to yesterday, let me be frank. I believe Dr. Ford. I may be wrong, but I believed her. And I believe Kavanaugh dodged and dissembled, ranted and raved, filibustered and prevaricated. I did not find him credible. I don't believe boof is flatulence. I don't believe the devil's triangle is a drinking game. And I don't believe calling yourself a girl's alumnus is being her friend. And I think drinking till you Ralph, or fall out of the bus, or don't remember the game, or need to piece together your memory the next day is more consistent with Dr. Ford's and others' testimony than his own. If Dr. Ford's testimony is true, I hope we can all agree Kavanaugh
has no business on the court. And I, for one, believed her. But set aside my own belief. As a prosecutor, I am horrified at what the committee has done. Terminating